Today I'm meeting with Andrew Hoffman of Hoffman Management, a firm he founded in 1990 with his brothers Stephen and Mark. Mr. Hoffman currently serves as Vice Chairman for the Community Housing Improvement Program and sits on the board of the Rent Stabilization Association. Additionally, he is a member of the Executive Board of the Realty Advisory Board on Labor Relations. Mr. Hoffman brings years of experience on all property management issues and has regularly presented a class on cutting costs at CNYC's annual conference. Today, we'll speak about budgeting for the coming year, a large concern for co-ops and condos as insurance, energy, and other prices continue to rise. Welcome, Andrew, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's great to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
First, I'd like to start by finding out how you initially look at the budgeting process and begin working. From there, we'll veer into where you see opportunities to cut costs and effectuate savings. And finally, we'll delve into areas of concern for the coming year and how boards can best address them. Here we are in the fall when most boards start considering their budget and plan for the coming year. What do you first look at and where do you start them off?
So, Rebecca, we're talking now at the beginning of November. I hope by now boards have seen at least a minimum the first draft of a budget. I actually begin working on my budgets in August. I like to get them in front of the boards in September because they need time to review it. And I like to have all my budgets finalized no later than December 1st so we can inform residents of the building of maintenance increases that begin January 1st.
With many boards likely to enact maintenance or common charge increases this year, the timing you're suggesting is even more important. How do you meet those internal deadlines?
We typically start working through the projections on how we feel 2023 will end. And then we use these projections along with a number of assumptions to begin drafting and putting together the 2024 budget.
So once you start putting that together, where are there runaway costs that you can bring under control to make the budget as tight as possible while still being feasible? Because we don't want to cut too much. Why don't we start off by looking at labor, repairs and maintenance, supplies, and preventive maintenance? Can you talk me through how boards can approach these expenses?
Rebecca, you lumped a lot into this first question. So let's break it down. As far as labor is concerned, most of us are governed by either a union contract or the new prevailing wage laws, so our hourly rates and benefits are fairly standard and not subject to much negotiation. One of the areas I'm constantly seeing is overtime, which can be controlled. It's the responsibility of a super or a property manager to manage overtime, especially when employees call in sick. We need to have temporary employees available who can cover on relatively short notice. Supplies are another area which we're all challenged with. We want to buy the right amount of supplies so the superintendent has what he needs, but we don't want to overbuy. Because in my experience, when we overbuy, things get lost, materials get wasted, or things simply go missing. One of the things I like to avoid is to make sure there is enough inventory so that the superintendent doesn't go to the hardware store on a regular basis. They all have their favorite local hardware store and understand when the super leaves the building to go to the local hardware store, many things happen. One is it's going to cost more. The local hardware store is obviously much more expensive than buying on the internet or buying from a vendor who delivers. Also, he wastes time. He goes to the hardware store. He has a relationship with the guys at the counter. They sit there and they talk. Third is, I've never met a superintendent to walk out of a hardware store with only the one item they need. They're always buying something else they didn't realize they need, and that's wasteful. The last thing you asked about was preventive maintenance. Preventive maintenance is the hardest part of our job and actually the most cost-effective. Do you know that cleaning and painting are the two easiest items to assist with preventive maintenance? Many supers don't realize how important this is. I know when I walk into a boiler room for the first time in a new building, it's dirty, there's oil on the floor, and the room hasn't been painted for many years. It's a clear indication to me that the building is not being properly maintained in other areas.
I couldn't agree more. And I'll add to that a clean building allows you to see problems like leaks as soon as they start to occur.
Now, what about energy costs? Obviously, with Local Law 97 coming up, this is a big issue for all buildings over 25,000 square feet. But even for smaller ones, it's an important cost to control. And we've noticed that Con Ed rates are going up. So what do you advise?
Local Law 97. Rebecca, I am not sure if I know what Local Law 97 is.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. I wish I'd never heard of it. We could spend an entire podcast just on Local Law 97. The two of us could spend hours. The one thing I'll say, because we are short on time for this specific podcast, is you really need to speak to your energy professionals to make sure you understand what your potential liability could be in 2024 and in 2030. People are getting a little crazy about complying with Local Law 97. And frankly, most of my co-ops are finding that they don't have a large penalty, especially in 2024. And their penalties are a couple of $1,000s. And it may be cost effective to just pay the penalty and look at this like this is another New York City tax. But certainly there is some low-hanging fruit that you should look at. And again, your professionals can help you do that. Upgrading your lighting to LED, putting weather stripping on the buildings. And now I'm looking at electrifying. We're all having problems with natural gas. And I'm looking at electrifying certain things like electric hot water heaters instead of running hot water through your gas boiler. So those kind of things would certainly help you. There are going to be some changes coming down the pipe. Frankly, right now, I wouldn't be spending a huge amount of money because there is still additional instructions, additional legislation, additional changes coming.
Absolutely.
And investing heavily in technology now, if your building is within 2024 thresholds, seems potentially foolish since we don't know how technologies will advance. Let's shift from Local Law 97 to another hot topic, insurance.
It's one of the things that comes up nonstop in all of our discussion groups. Who are you using? How much do you pay? Everybody's concerned about premiums going up. Where do you see the cost drivers for insurance today? And how do you think boards should approach exclusions, riders, and other demands?
So insurance is much different over the last couple of years. It's been really challenging. We've been seeing double-digit increases in the last few years, and I don't see an end in sight. Worse than the increases, we're all seeing that the policies are being reduced. Gone are the days where we have the large umbrella policies where we spent $7,000 a year for $50 million worth of umbrella. Not get those anymore. We're now getting a $5 million umbrella policy for $25,000. So it's completely opposite. The one thing that is really hard is when your insurance broker gives you the quotes 5 days before the policy ends, telling you that he can't get quotes, he can't go to multiple insurance companies, and it's really frustrating for a property manager because all you can do at that point is accept the proposal. You cannot be without insurance. So one of the things that I've been working on proactively is speaking to our insurance brokers at least 2 months before the expiration. You have to begin this conversation early. Everybody at the table needs to understand what we're talking about here because insurance issues are not going away. Yes, you talk about the exclusions and the riders and the other demands. Every contract that I do with a roofer or an elevator company or our next door neighbor to put up a scaffolding has to now be improved by our insurance companies. And all the insurance company wants to do is put the liability on someone else. We put up sidewalk bridges in front of our buildings and need our next door neighbor sign off on it. So I have to do a neighbor access agreement. My insurance company is trying to throw that liability on my next door neighbor's insurance company. And my next door neighbor says to me, "Are you crazy? You're the one that wants to put the sidewalk bridge up." Those are the challenges that we're seeing every day. And we have to understand the responsibility of each party as part of our insurance package.
Do you know where you would find that when you're looking through your proposals? Is there a specific place you look to see how those items are going to be handled, or is that something that's not really mentioned in them?
So something like having the insurance company reviewing contract is not anything that's written in your policy. That would be something that would be disclosed through your agent. But that is extremely typical now. At least 3/4 of the buildings that I manage now, we are required to show contracts for capital projects to our insurance company and have them review the actual contract.
I've also heard that certain carriers are now requiring buildings to forward insurance certificates for specific apartment alterations as well. Have you seen that at all?
So not yet. That's been excluded. Obviously, in our standard alteration agreements, we do have the indemnifications where the shareholder indemnifies the co-op. And the insurance companies I'm working with right now are okay with that. We certainly need to execute a hold harmless agreement for each alteration. And we're executing hold harmless agreements even if one of our owners bring in an outside plumber or an outside electrician to do work in their apartment. So in addition to the certificate of insurance, we are requiring a hold harmless execution.
Just one more question on insurance looking forward. So if board's doing a budget now, what are you anticipating in terms of percent increase for the general liability and property insurance?
Well, first of all, it depends when your insurance is coming up for renewal. So you're doing a budget on a calendar year, but your insurance never renews on January 1st. So like real estate taxes, where you know what your real estate taxes are for the first 2 quarters of the year in your budgeting, the same holds true for your insurance. So if your insurance is renewing in July and August, you only need to budget for the next 6 months. I have a conversation with our broker about it. I've typically been doing 10 to 15% for my 2024 budgets.
Substantial. Thank you. How can boards keep control of runaway legal costs? So I know a lot of buildings now have to turn to corporate counsel for items like the access agreements, which you discussed earlier, enforcing governing documents, and sometimes even inter-shareholder and unit owner conflicts. What's the best way to keep those hourly rates down?
Rebecca, we are living in litigious times. Many times in the past, I felt that I was able to guide a co-op board on some fundamental legal issues without consulting outside attorneys. My brother's an attorney, so we have an in-house legal counsel, but those days are gone. I really am so uncomfortable these days giving any sense of legal advice, considering how litigious the world is. One of the areas that I think is really important in dealing with outside counsel is for the board to appoint a single point of contact. I've received too many legal bills where the attorney is answering multiple board members for the same issues. So you need to have one point of contact, and that should be the only board member who should be speaking with the attorney. The other side of the coin is, let's not be pound wise and penny foolish. We need to bring our attorneys in early. I know it's expensive, but bringing in the attorney early in the conversation is going to save money in the long run.
It certainly makes sense, given the new insurance and legal liability implications, that you would want contracts to be ironclad from the beginning. So shifting gears here, let's move on to fixed costs. Or what?
People consider fixed costs, the real estate taxes and debt service. What type of work can be done to control those costs? For instance, tax certiorari work. Where do you see the benefits from that?
So just commenting quickly on this concept of fixed and variable costs. I speak often at the NYC conferences on controlling costs. As far as I'm concerned, every cost is controllable. I sit in these meetings sometimes and they just pass over fixed costs. Nothing you can do about that. But there's something we can do. As an example, as you said, the tax certiorari. I don't know if you all remember the famous New York State lottery commercial where they say you have to be in it to win it. You got to buy a lottery ticket if you want to win. The same holds true for tax certiorari. You must file a protest every year. You get an attorney that will do this on a contingent basis. I know I've spoken with small co-ops and they say they have problems getting attorneys for smaller buildings. Yes, I understand that because they work on a contingency, but you got to shop around and your managing agent can help you with that. You may not get an offer of reduction every year, but these protests hang over the Department of Finance, and it gives your attorneys the ability to negotiate a better deal going forward, knowing that there are the previous years that they have to deal with. And please understand the way these reductions are calculated, they are a forward-looking reduction because your taxes are assessed over a 5-year period. So while the attorneys like to get their commission up front for all the years going forward, you do have the ability to negotiate that with them. And our attorneys understand that when they work with us, they get their fee on a yearly basis for the years that we get the benefit. I hope that makes sense.
It does, and that's a great idea. I could see where it would be very helpful for buildings not to have to spend a huge amount upfront for benefits that won't be seen for up to 5 years. So on to one of our largest expenses outside of real estate taxes, debt service.
So obviously you have a mortgage and you're in the middle of it. There's not much that you can do. But for those buildings that are going to be looking to refinance in this market, what's your current advice?
I hope that you are well into your middle of your mortgage, perhaps in the third or fourth year of your mortgage, and you're very happily sitting with a 3 or 3.2% mortgage interest. If you are in your final few years of your mortgage, my condolences. So as far as getting a new mortgage, there's not much you can do. If you have a balance on your mortgage, you're going to have to refinance, or you're going to have to go to your shareholders and do an assessment to pay down your mortgage. Luckily, interest rates have plateaued a little bit in the last 6 months. So there is a little bit more certainty. The Feds just came out with another decision not to raise interest rates in the short term. So hopefully they'll be getting a little more competitive. But the one thing that I think we all could look at is our lines of credit. Many buildings, especially the buildings that refinanced a few years ago, was just given these large line of credit, and they were tied into prime. And a couple of years ago, it was the most attractive way to borrow money without assessing your building. So you have a line of credit balance right now. And I don't know if you realize that line of credit balance is not fixed like your mortgage. That line of credit right now is probably costing you 5, 6, or 7%. And that's going to have to be accounted for in your new budgets. So one of the things I'm suggesting to boards is they look at those balances and see how much this financing is costing. And maybe now is the time to bite the bullet and assess shareholders to reduce or eliminate the current line of credit balance.
So with the lines of credit, how often do the rates change? Is it on a monthly? I don't know. Is it an annual basis? How often do they change the rates?
They're typically monthly. You would have to look at your individual agreement, but the ones that I have seen are monthly. So those go up relatively quickly, and your interest rates are now double of what they were before.
I hadn't thought about that. That's crazy.
Becca, that's why I'm here.
I know. That's why I invited you. In terms of the mortgage and how buildings can get money, have you seen any buildings taking advantage of the new energy loans or NYSERDA incentives to do capital work? I'm thinking particularly here in terms of smaller buildings and condos that have problems getting loans sometimes to do capital work. Now that there are loans for exterior envelope type work, do you see any buildings taking advantage of those? Or is the interest rate too high?
So, Rebecca, I haven't seen the loan availability for building envelopes, even though I think it's out there. I just haven't seen it. But we are taking advantage of some of the energy loans and grants from NYSERDA. If you're putting in a new boiler or new air conditioning units or upgrading to LED lighting. And remember, it's not just NYSERDA. Con Ed and PSE&G also have programs available where they'll provide materials, low-cost funding, or outright grants. I just put a new boiler in a building, and I asked the contractor to apply to Con Ed, and we got $7,000 back on a $60,000 boiler just for asking. So certainly ask, look at the programs. I have a couple of companies that I'm working with that came into buildings and they evaluated all my old fluorescent lighting. We all thought fluorescent lighting was the best. It wasn't incandescent, it was fluorescent. You were saving money with that. But obviously LED lighting is much better. And I'm able to hire a third party to come in, and especially on the small buildings, it's great. They come in and they provide the materials, they provide the labor, they get you the money back, and you don't pay anything. It's awesome. So it's certainly something to look at.
And that's for the local law 88 work, right? The retrofitting the lights in the common areas. Is that what you're seeing the money for?
Yep. Yeah. And that all dovetails into local law 97 improvements.
Right.
And your energy grade and your local law 87 and your local law 84 and your other local laws that we all talk about all day long.
Buildings, I think, should take advantage of that right now while they can, because there's a hearing going on actually in Albany about the Clean Energy Fund right now, which is part of what gives the money for that lighting program. And that's one of the things they're talking about cutting. So while it's available, I think is key.
And if you don't get it right away, keep trying, because NYSERDA has money, then they don't have money, then they have money again. So keep trying.
That's a good point. All right. So looking forward, what are our trends and outliers, do you think, for the coming year? And where do you see things going? Where should boards be focusing in their budgeting?
Well, New York City continues to make building managers' life a living hell. And that certainly goes with all the expenses going on in the building. It seems like every few weeks a new local law or new mandate is thrown at us. And sometimes I feel like we're not an actual management company, but we're actually just a compliance company. And compliance is costly and, frankly, not a lot of fun. If I had a choice between complying with new city regulations or putting out a fire in a boiler room, I'm going to the boiler room. So you're going to see a lot more money in compliance in the next couple of years. We have to now do our gas inspections, and we have to do flood notifications. Just every time the city council and the state government tells us that we need to do something else, put another piece of paper in our purchase and our sublease applications, it's constantly costing your managing agent and ultimately you more money. And it makes our life really difficult.
And a lot of it requires you to hire professionals that are being hired by everybody else. So difficult to find. I mean, annual parapet wall inspections, everybody filing Local Law 97 at the same time come May 1st. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, the parapet walls is a perfect example. I still can't figure out why, even though we have a 5-year facade inspection program, now I need to do a yearly parapet inspection. It's just, these are the kind of things that just really incense us property managers.
I know that was one of the items in our testimony in that hearing for the parapet wall, that FISP buildings should be exempted because they're supposedly safe for 5 years. We didn't get that one.
Did not get that one.
Did not get that one. All right. So lastly, we had a question come up in one of our discussion groups about the process. When is information shared with shareholders and unit owners, and what information should be shared as you're going through budgeting? In this building's case, the concern was that they wanted to give people time to prepare for assessment that was coming down the pipe. But obviously, how much transparency and information goes back and forth will differ from building to building, depending on how each building's operated. But do you have any general advice?
I think transparency is paramount. I tell my supers when they're calling me about a problem, I understand it's not their fault, that they're just simply the messenger. And I know my supers get nervous when they call me to tell me about the boiler is out or there's leak in the building. I work with them to make them understand. I get it. It's not their fault. And the same way, the boards need to understand that it's not their fault and that everyone else is going through the same thing they are. These days, a 4, 5, 6% increase in yearly maintenance common charges, it's not uncommon. It's difficult to make these hard decisions about increasing these charges on a yearly basis. But there's more problems if you don't add the increase that you really need to balance your budget. I see boards try to save a percentage point or two, and it only comes back to haunt them in the next year, because they're going to begin the next year with a structural deficit in their budget. If they needed 7% and they're only going to do 6% because they think there's going to be some magic that happens, they're going to start the next year off with a deficit, and it's going to be a problem. So, I just took over a new building from another management company who clearly made a mistake in the 2023 budget. They didn't put enough in for a couple of line items. I don't know if they were trying to just, thinking that their job was to have a better budget. I don't think that, because I'm transparent with my boards. So now they really need about an 8% budget increase, which is huge. And I get it. We had a board meeting last week, so we all decided the following. We're going to do a 7% increase, which is really at the top end of the scale. We're going to do a 7% increase. We're going to explain to the building, to the residents, what happened in 2023 and how that compounds in 2024. And then we're going to tell them that we're going to look at this at the end of June after 6 months, and we may have to come back for a small increase to cover the rest of the year. And I think that was an elegant solution to a real problem that these guys have. I always find that if you explain things properly and honestly to your shareholders, they will understand. And what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to vote you off to this wonderful job that you have, that you don't get paid for, that you really care about. They're going to vote you off because you had an extra percentage increase and you were honest with them. I don't see that happening.
I agree. I agree. And I think most people appreciate for planning purposes knowing what's actually going to happen. In my building, we ran into problems with account payables because we didn't increase the maintenance enough. And, and then I'm like, where are the payables? And then I see the payables and we owe tons of money. And of course, then the next year, your maintenance increase is even higher and people aren't budgeting for it individually. So the problem.
Yeah, that's a way that some property managers have to manage the deficit. And you sit there in December and you got $40,000 in unpaid bills and you have $10,000 of cash in the bank, and you know why you ran a deficit that year.
And that's not where you want to be. That's for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you think is important to throw in there?
I really think that the one thing the board needs to do is ask a lot of questions. There are no stupid questions. Please put your property manager on the hot seat for a couple hours in this budget process. They should be able to justify every line item. They should be able to explain to you what the thought process is. And this way, I'll tell you, as a property manager, at the end of the day, it will make my job easier because everyone will understand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agree 100%. Well, thank you so much
for sharing your insights. I learned a lot. That was Andy Hoffman of Hoffman Management joining us for our budgeting podcast in our series Podcast for Proactive Boards. Members that have any questions about any of the topics raised in this podcast, please feel free to contact the office at 212-496-7400 or email me at pool@cnyc.coop. If your building is not yet a member, we hope you'll consider joining us. Simply visit our website, www.cnyc.coop. Thank you for listening.